Welcome to the Love Disciple podcast. Today we are conducting another dream interview of mine, this time with YouTuber Vrba. So when I started this podcast, I put together a list of people who would be awesome to interview. And Sarah was one of those people who I really had to push myself to believe that I could ask. I've been watching her YouTube videos for years, and she is so sweet, genuine, and awesome. I've always been impressed with her ability to read the astrological weather as she does her tarot readings and her astrology readings. Her readings are not only incredibly accurate, but they also point to a softer, more loving side of spirituality that astrology, like pop astrology and pop tarot, often miss. I think we've all heard of the stereotypes of the signs, and we've all heard of, the scary tarot cards. Well, her work is all about unraveling that and finding the truer things underneath and how those truths can be so much more loving. So join Sarah and I as we dive deep into astrology, tarot, and the unimaginable horizon.
Dynamite, I'm blowing up my mind. I wanna be free, I wanna be cool, I wanna be bad.
All right, welcome, everybody. This is a really exciting moment for me. It's 3 a.m. in Texas and 10 a.m. Where you are, Sarah, in Sweden. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, how lovely. This is Sarah Vrba. She is a YouTuber and an astrologist and a tarot and oracle card reader. She is absolutely incredible. And I actually watch her videos because she presents a really different view or interpretation on all things, on tarot, on oracle readings, on astrology. And this interpretation really feels much more loving, more soft, kind, gentle, and less kind of self-development-y. It just feels better for the spirit and for the soul. And so I really was excited to have her onto this podcast called Love Disciple, because and you'll hear more about this in my episode. We are in a time where many people are waking up to spirituality and exploring it, and there's so many different ways to explore it. And I really do think that the loving and the kind way has the potential to take us the farthest. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Sarah. And Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do within the context of YouTube?
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. That means so much to me. Yes, that's what it's all about, is bringing it back to a place where we really feel safe to use these tools. So I have been working in the world of YouTube for the last almost 8 years now, which is wild, and been working with tarot and astrology for about 20 years or more at this point in my life. So it's been something that I've worked with for a very, very long time, but of course, didn't really start putting myself out there until 2017. It's been such a wild journey to experience sharing that with a wider audience and just developing those gifts. And I've had to learn so much about myself in that journey. I think you start off with some ideas. I started off with certain ideas about how my work was, and it's really been changed over the last 8 years in a really beautiful way that I think has brought me into a much truer place when it comes to working with tarot and astrology and making it about kind of this wild journey rather than about trying to be somebody in the world, perfect ourselves, perform it. My goal is to deconstruct that a little bit and allow ourselves to be with the many layered experience of living a life, kind of come back to thinking about myth and storytelling and energetics and the way that we speak to ourselves, the way we tell stories, and making these tools feel a lot more alive and dynamic and supportive, and not just a scary place where we find out all the things we've been doing wrong. So that's really been at the heart of what I've been doing the last 8 years for sure.
Yes, this is so juicy. I'm so happy that you talked about myth, because the myth and the symbolism is really helpful for kind of bringing these lofty spiritual concepts down to earth. I think I want to just address the format that you use in your videos, because it's incredibly useful. First of all, in your videos, you talk about the transits that are happening astrologically, and the most popular zodiac transit that everybody knows about is their sun sign. So tell us, what is your sun sign?
My sun sign?
Yeah.
I am a Leo.
Oh. Okay,
What's your sun sign?
I'm an Aries.
Nice.
So, one of my favorite things that you do, I'm curious about all of the signs, so it's always so fun to learn. But every season, you kind of tell the alternative, not even an alternative story, but the other side of the zodiac signs, because every sign has their stereotype, right?
Oh yeah, I think we all have fun with that. It's great. It's great fun, the stereotypes and the kind of flamboyant versions of each of these signs. I'm all here for that. I think it's so fun. But then of course, there's always so much depth to every single one of these. You know, we have all 12 signs within us, within our chart, within some aspect of our lives. And really, I think in living a full life, it's all about learning all of these and their importance. And so there's always so much under the surface of each of these signs and what they're trying to bring to life through us and through the world. And they're ancient. I mean, they're so much more ancient than even kind of the way we think about astrology in the 21st century. So many of these archetypes you can find in different cultures, and different storytelling rituals throughout the world. So they're really intrinsic to being alive in this world.
Right. As an example, I'm dying to hear, can you tell us a little bit about like how people see Leo, the lion, and then how you describe Leo?
Well, so fire signs always get teased, as you probably know, being an Aries, for being really annoying and dramatic and always needing attention. And that's definitely true for Leos. That would be the stereotype. Also, the fun stereotype is the like leopard print and like flamboyant outfits, wanting luxury, wanting nice things, always needing to be the center of attention, bringing the drama. All of that. And that's tied to, Leo's all about royalty. It's this idea of leadership. But underneath that, it's the sign ruled by the heart and also by the sun. And those are really big energies to carry. um, Leo brings us really back to the core of what it means to be alive. So, Leo, for me, it's what does it mean to lead in our lives through the heart, via the heart? How do we do that? How do we bring ourselves back to that? What does that empowerment look like? How do we nourish our internal sun? How do we allow ourselves to shine in a way that's really true? Rather than it being about controlling our lives, how do we come back to a sense of childlike wonder? Because it's also the sign associated with children and play and romance, which seem like really basic things. But when you really strip that back, you realize how powerful that is to work with. And often, too, with Leo, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And that means it's also one of the places where many of us will be doing some of our deepest digging, and like uncovering the rules around why we think we're allowed to be in joy or in play or leading with our heart. A lot of us have been trained out of that, living in this version of the world. So it's as basic as it is. It's also one of the more challenging places to really look inside and feel fully.
I can see that. That's really beautiful, and I've never really heard that about Leo. So thank you. Um, One of the things that I realized while you were talking was just that there's kind of two ways to that people approach astrology. One is like looking at their birth chart, like them as an individual, and then there's the way that you approach it on your YouTube, which is kind of looking at the astrological weather. I don't really know how else to describe it. Was there a point in time where you realized, as like a human being on planet Earth, that the transits and what was happening in astrology were being reflected here out in your life and in the collective? And what was that experience like for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll have to think about this for a minute. Um, because it goes back so far for me. It's kind of always been interwoven into my life. I know that at various points, I've had really specific personal things happen that were involved with transits. For example, I had a very intense relationship that began right at the beginning of my Saturn return. I have Saturn in Scorpio. This person was Scorpio. And the day that transit began, this partner told me he loved me. I mean, we were in it for that entire transit. And it was a very odd alignment moment where it was like, wow, this is a thing. But I've also just discovered it through all my work too. I think just working one-on-one with people and having so many conversations over the years, it'll be really interesting coming in, and we'll be exploring together and feeling through things together, and we'll realize that we're both working with energy in a very specific way. And then, I might talk to several people in a day, and everybody's kind of working with, maybe they're feeling foggy or really clear-headed and energized or a little bit rattled. And I find that really fascinating. But I do want to put in the caveat that it's important to always relax into our storytelling around that. I don't ever want people to feel like superstitious about any transit where it's like, okay, well, Mars is going to be squaring off, so everybody's going to be agitated and upset, because we can also set ourselves up to feel very stressed, I think, unnecessarily. So that's the other part of it, where it's like, here are some general themes, but also hold that lightly, because you're going to experience it in your way, and it may or may not be something that connects with you in the way it connects with somebody else. So it's also, I think, always about holding it as lightly as possible, but it can be really helpful if you are feeling some of these larger waves moving through, that you're not just out of your mind. You're not you're not just making things up. So I think that part is really, really helpful.
Oh my gosh, so helpful. And your readings, I do find them like very, very helpful, very accurate, which is really, really fun. And I didn't know that you did personal readings. That makes total sense. That sort of process of like seeing person after person experiencing, just a similar underlying energy that manifests through their own life and through their own patterns. Um, I love that I could be independently on my own before I open up YouTube, thinking about, themes that are going on in life, things that I'm seeing within my friend group or like playing out amongst the collective on social media. And then I open up a Sarah Vrba YouTube video, and there's this like lovely description of what is going on. And just like you did right now, completely softened by like just an awareness that it doesn't have to be harsh, it doesn't have to be hard. And also, here's some supporting elements. So can you talk a little bit about I mean, that's a theme with you, is like this message of like there is the pop surface level narrative, and then there's the deeper narrative, and that narrative is loving. Have you noticed that since the beginning, or is that something that you've teased out since you started?
Yeah, I think that's something that just has kept developing over time, because the longer I've worked with all of these tools, the more you just discover, like, the layers just keep giving. I'm sure that I started off much more connected to some of these more traditional or standard kind of approaches. And then just the longer you work with it, the more it just gives and shows. And I think for me, I realized at some point that it wasn't about using these tools to become somebody in the world and to make yourself fit and to be what you think you need to be. It was about releasing all of that. It was about returning to something so much deeper and wild and mythic, really, really mythic. And that is always what's leading me forward, I would say. So yeah, I think I just got bored too. I get really bored because, like when we're playing with astrology and it's like, okay, yes, I'm a Leo, and that means that this is who I am. And I'm going to put myself in a little tiny box and just keep myself there forever. It's like, well, that's boring. What I'm evolving, we're all evolving. We'll never just be that one thing. And I've discovered so many other aspects of myself over the years in doing this work and exploring it. Yeah.
Oh, that's so exciting because that leads me into one of my favorite concepts of yours, which I want to address after the break. It's the concept of the unimaginable horizon. So we're going to take just a quick break and then get back into that.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm out in nature, and I just want to take a moment to talk a little bit about Sarah Vrba. She is one of my favorite people that we've interviewed during this podcast series because I've actually been following her for so long on YouTube. And I wanted to just let everybody know about her YouTube channel where you can find weekly almost videos about astrology, tarot readings, and all of them are intuitive. And you can tell just from her energy and what we've been talking about on the podcast so far that she's a really gentle spirit. She's somebody who really cares and takes time to get to know exactly what is going on spiritually and communicates it to people in a really, really loving way. She also has a website. If you want to visit her website, I recommend checking out her Patreon. Her Patreon is really where she gives all of her worksheets. She goes in depth with the people who are in her Patreon community, and she basically helps them explore deeper some of the concepts and themes that she begins talking about on YouTube. So highly recommend checking out her Patreon. You can go to her website, sarahtarot.com, to find out more about her Patreon, or you can just skip all of that and go straight to Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Sarah Vrba, VRBA. Thanks for watching as always.
All right, we are jumping back in with the unimaginable horizon. It is an incredible concept that you have developed that I think everybody has experienced in their life, right? That moment of magic.
Yeah, it's a pretty universal thing. And the reason I call it that, it's something that kind of came through to me, I don't know, probably 6 years ago or something, is I realized that even those of us who love to vision board or daydream and like come up with so many ingredients in our lives, there's always these elements that come in that we never imagined. Like, there's just no way we could have imagined that this is what it is. And even just when we think about our lives, the people we end up meeting, the projects we end up doing, the places we end up living, so many of those elements were never explicitly in a vision board or a daydream. Maybe they were like linked in some kind of way, but there's so many of these ingredients that we just will never be able to fully imagine because the divine and the wild is so much more expansive than it's so difficult for our minds to wrap around that. And so for me, the unimaginable horizon's always been a place of deep comfort because one, it's just very exciting to think, wow, there's so many things that I don't even know are coming yet. So many beautiful things, so many beautiful moments of support and care. And even if I'm in a season of my life where maybe I'm stressed, I don't know how it's going to change. There are so many ingredients and places that I can't imagine yet that are going to help me. And I think just it's kind of that negative space experience where you can see the form and the shape of something, but there's so much that you can't see yet. And that is what's really holding you. That's where like the great void, the great mystery is always creating. And just, it's a great approach for allowing ourselves to step into that. And then of course, there's those moments when those ingredients show up and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the unimaginable horizon. This just popped into my life in a way that I just could never have predicted. That's how I'm here in Sweden right now. Everything about that was unimaginable horizon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the theme of, I feel like anybody who has a North Node in Scorpio is just getting really familiar with that magic. And I mean, I told my friend about it today or yesterday because we were talking about the river of misery that we sometimes swim in, and it's like, oh, we're doing something and we're changing, and our ancient brains are like, don't change, everything will be horrible if you change. And we're just like, yeah, everything is going to be horrible, all of my worst fears are going to come true, and you're just swimming in the river. And my friend and I were talking about that, and I was like, the river is something that we can definitely swim in, but there's also these elements that we've never could have guessed would happen. And I find on a macro and a micro level that no matter how long you're swimming, it never takes you to the bottomless pit that you think is at the end of the river. There's always some sort of stop where you get off, and then there's all these beautiful things that happen. And so the real suffering is actually when you're imagining what all the worst things that could happen, right?
Yes. Yes. Oh, you just encapsulated that so perfectly. Like fear of change, fear of not changing as well, being stuck forever in something, all of it. And yeah, I think it's so interesting too, because it's kind of this experience of tension with it and then surrender to it, which I'm also all about. Like, it's fine to resist sometimes and be like, no, I'm stressed out, there's gonna be the pit of doom, but it like also you're gonna sometimes have times where you feel open and you're relaxed. And the more you relax into that, the more that unimaginable horizon meets us, which is really hard. I mean, that's one of the things we're working on exploring throughout a lifetime, I would say. It's like, how do we allow that to meet us and carry us? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Yes, yes.
And it pops up a lot in myth too. I mean, we've talked about this in other episodes on the podcast about, the perfect myth of the boy who was a literal baby going up against the Dark Lord. And there's a moment of magic that happens at the beginning where, he walks away with a scar and the Dark Lord is gone. And then at the end, there's a teenage boy going up against the Dark Lord and his army, and everything points to he's going to lose. And you still walk in anyway because there's this magical moment. And every myth has that moment. I should say that every story has that moment. And it's so impressive when it comes, because you just kind of do things in life and then you keep pushing and you keep pushing, and it seems like it's not even pushing, you just keep going, and then it seems like everything is against you, but there is a moment where something unimaginable happens. And it's a miracle, it's magic, everybody has a word for it, but it just completely turns the tide, and it's so amazing because it's so small.
Yeah. That was making me think too, the myth of going into the darkness and meeting ourselves, meeting our shadows, meeting the longings, because that's really what's going on. It's like the myth of Inanna who goes to greet her sister in the underworld, Ereshkigal. There, and she has to go through these 7 gates of initiation to meet herself and to actually hear herself. And in doing that and facing these things we think we'll never be able to face, like we'll never be able to go to that place, it opens the support. It's like that fear of change. It's like as soon as we acknowledge that we want to change or that we need to change, or we just take one little step, the road meets us in some way. It shows us the next thing in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, and only by walking the path, not by thinking through it. Can you find that support you need?
That is so true. And it is interesting because we live in a time when I think it's a very mental time, and a lot of us are living in our minds. I'm one of them as well. Like my work, I'm always bringing myself back through my work because I'll be living up here. And it's so true that it's that action removes doubt. Moving with it, trying things is really where the support shows up. Yeah.
Is it the older folks in America who say you can't wait for all the stoplights between here and Dallas to be green. I think that's what they say. And it's just like old folk wisdom, but it's so good. It's like, yeah, you would never start a road trip and wait for all the stoplights to be green and they'd be like, okay, let's go now.
Yes, I love that. I've never heard that. That sounds like a very Texan saying, but I
Oh
love
my God.
it.
Yeah, it has to be. Okay, I want to transition while we still have time and talk about tarot, and we can start about tarot and just kind of segue into oracle decks. What inspired you to do a card reading in the middle of an astrology video?
I think that is definitely not something like I've just came up with. There's so many people who work with both of these things. They really innately work together. And what I love about tarot is, speaking of like storytelling and myth, in some ways it's even more flexible and open than astrology. Like, I also think astrology is very, very flexible. It's way more flexible than it might at first appear. Like, it is not as rigid as we like to think of it sometimes. But tarot for me is, oh, if you want to like deep dive on the subconscious and the great collective unconscious, tarot is just like a doorway right in there. And it allows us to be like right in the present moment and see what's happening. So I might come in with all my notes and the things I'm intuiting about a season or a time. And then that element always brings in this kind of candor in the moment where I'm also just listening to what's happening.
Mm.
And I think they inform each other very, very well. Uh, they keep things moving. It keeps the conversation open in a really beautiful way. So it's always felt like a natural pairing.
The listening. I never put together that that is where the candor comes from. It's so true because you come to tarot with some sort of question or at least an intent to hear what the cards have to say. And so there's always something revealed there that is very truthful, that feels very real. You are okay, so whenever you pull the cards, there are cards that everybody knows that people fear. And like if you were to pull a card in amongst anybody, I almost said mixed company, just like spiritual people and not spiritual people. If you pulled the Tower card or the Death card, there would be like a oh moment. So can you talk a little bit about how you approach those cards and any card with some sort of like pop connotation?
Yeah. Oh man, those are like my favorite cards ever. Um, I love working with them, and I think that's a result of working with them for so many years. It's just kind of like you just develop new relationships. But I think one thing I really noticed, especially like when I started doing work on YouTube, is that there was a tendency in the tarot community, not all practitioners, to kind of go to these like scary places, like we were talking about all the things we overthink, the worst case scenarios. And I would kind of see that sometimes and I would think that can't be totally accurate. I'm sorry. It's just like, I feel like there's something else going on. And for me, one of the interesting things about tarot is all the implicit things that are going on beyond what you just see in the card. There's about 10 times more information going on outside of the frame of the image that we're seeing. So there's like the apparent image, the literal translation, like Three of Swords. It's a heart with three swords stuck into it. Okay, and like that apparent image, I think anybody who, even if you've never seen tarot before, you'd be like, ooh, that doesn't seem like it's a good time. But underneath, it just doesn't like seemingly bode well.
Mm-hmm.
But the implicit reality there or message is about an awareness, a time of being able to tenderly see the swords that are sitting somewhere deep within ourselves, and the beauty of being able to slowly, in that awareness, remove them, change them, transform them. So even cards that might have like this really apparent message have just everything about them is telling you there's something here that is longing to be heard, that is longing for expression. And that's why they're my favorite cards, because they're actually the place where the truest things in our lives happen. And that's often the case. It's when we lose a loved one. It's when we go through a breakup or a divorce or a job ends and we think we're total failures, that we meet ourselves. It's not when we're just like, I'm amazing, everybody thinks that I'm performing the perfect role. It's the times when we come to something deep and true that we meet what we're really longing for, that we decide we're going to do the project that we really care about. So yeah, that's why they're my favorite cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're doing a deep dive into the major arcana still on your Patreon?
Yeah, I have. It's all out now. So if you join that, all 12 weeks, I mean, we went hard on these 22 cards. It's 12 sessions, and we just moved through each one of those, because as a whole journey from Fool all the way to the World, it takes you on a complete unpeeling journey that's really, really amazing. So yeah, it's available.
Oh my gosh, okay, I keep forgetting to join. I was a part of the Patreon before, and then I lost my musician job and I became very poor. And even though it was so affordable, I was just like, I can't do it. Like the drama kicked in, and I want to join ASAP because I'm currently writing a story based on the myth of Persephone, and it's a story of the space cowgirl, and I just really love the richness of the tarot. I mean, 22 cards taking you through a journey of like unpeeling, like what's not to love.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that sounds like an amazing story. You're gonna have to let me know when when you're feeling ready for sharing that. Yeah, and it really is that. I was realizing as I was creating it that it's really this weaving between going down into the depths and coming back up, and then you go down in the depths and you come back up, and you do it about 4 times
Mm.
in just the major arcana, because that's what it's about. It's like, that's life. You dive to the deep depths, and then you come back up, and then you dive to the depths and you come back up, and it's constant death and rebirth. Yeah, so Persephone, totally.
Absolutely. What about the what are they? Minor arcana? The
Yeah.
tell me about those, because you have such great I don't know, character profiles for them.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, minor arcana in some ways. I love major arcana. They're really bold
Mhm.
stories there, like deep myth archetypes that are just holding you. But minor arcana is fascinating to me because there's so much detail there. And they really work with so many scenarios that we experience in life. And that's a really fun place to also kind of push back against the established descriptions of these energetics. There are so many tarot decks in the world now that have done that work. And I think we can all find decks that reflect our spirits a little bit more. But I find minor arcana to be a really fun place to dive in, especially swords, because the sword suit in and of itself can often look very challenging. If you look at the whole journey through that suit, it's a lot of stabbing and, and just like scenarios where you're not sure what's going on, and you're like, oh my god, what is going on? Once again, swords is about the mind. It's about the stories we tell. So it's an important journey working with swords. It's always like, oh, there's something there we're having to take care with the way we're using our minds, using our storytelling, using the way we're treating ourselves. What's going on there? Where are we causing stress, self-harm? And it's okay we have those, but how do we witness them? So that's one of my favorite suits to work with. And all of the suits kind of reflect different aspects of our lives: self-expression with the wands, embodiment with the pentacles, and yeah, swords, the mind, and what am I forgetting? Oh, cups, intuition, developing our intuition, developing our trust in the river of life and the mystery. So yeah, there's a lot there.
Oh, so exciting. There were so many things that I was thinking of because, so many practices say that the mind is like a knife or a sword or things like that. And there's really so much to go into. I really resonated with what you said earlier about how, there's the thing that we perceive, and then there's so much around it, outside of it, that we just really can't perceive at any given point in time, or that we may get hints of, or that we can even piece together if we create like a quilting pattern of a bunch of different teachers. I'm curious, has there ever been a moment in your life where you felt that you were in deep, really centered maybe, or maybe in like a really meditative state, and you were able to pick up on some surprising aspects of a reading that you were doing that you didn't expect or would have never originally perceived?
Yeah, I think that's happened a lot over the years. I'm trying to think of a very specific moment right now. Um, yeah, that often happens, like the more relaxed I am. And I think that's why it's so important to develop a sense of like, it's safe. It's
Mm.
safe to pull cards. Like you don't have to go in being stressed. Like, what is it going to tell me about what I have to change? Like going in feeling very relaxed is the most helpful thing. And then, a lot of times I'll see a card, like the apparent card. Let's say it's 10 of Swords, which is, really intense image. And, I'll just be relaxing there and I will feel this deep peace. So you're looking at this apparent image of this murder scenario that looks very dark, very bleak. And, I'll be feeling something bigger than that. I'll be feeling maybe a sense of total release of pressure. I no longer have to carry that identity. And a lot of times it is the feeling more than the storytelling that is leading the way. And it's like that feeling of the space around us. It's like feeling of the mystery. It's like you feel the contours of it, um, peripherally and physically, more than just looking at the image. So I hope that kind of works with what you're asking.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful. I always try to describe it to people. I struggle. It's like when you're a baby and you have that game where you fit the shape into the shaped hole. Like there's a star-shaped hole and the star block goes in the star-shaped hole. I always try to tell people that it's like that. You're kind of knowing that the hole is shaped like something, like some sort of star shape, but you don't have the block just yet. So you're just trying to describe the outline of it. Um, but yeah, that's incredible. As we're wrapping up, I've been curious. I know you've mentioned a couple of books on your YouTube that you really recommend or that have really helped you, and you can recommend the same ones, but I am curious, is there a particular book or reading or text that has helped you on your path a lot?
Well, one of my beloved favorites, I think it's one of the most important books that's come out maybe ever, but like definitely in the last few years, is Rest is Resistance by Trisha Hersey. It's so important. Like I will get emotional. Like it's a very important book, um, and very liberating, and just beautifully written. And it really is reclaiming our dream space and thinking about this mechanized world we live in, where it's about performing and productivity and making things happen. And it's a really deeply soulful book. And I think it gives permission to go back to this intuitive space that we've been talking about this whole conversation, that how important it is, how alive it is. It's just I will praise her work for all time. Just my favorite thing ever.
I love that.
Mhm.
And then your Patreon, can you tell me a little bit more? When I joined, I think that it was a little bit different. You had one tier, and you would do deep dives into what it is you were talking about, which I loved. I mean, I was watching every video at the time and just like, oh, so nice. And then there's things that you can do on your own. Is it still the same format now?
Yeah, we do a lot on this Patreon. Somehow it's become such a big project. So we have little rituals for the new and full moons. I do a weekly chat where we kind of get a sense of the weather, and just feel through that together. Right now, I'm also doing a wild dreaming series where every week I'm giving a really light, loving, playful practice to kind of come back to our internal lanterns and feel safe in that and joyful in that, bring ourselves back into that creative flow. Yeah, we also moved through the entire major arcana recently, so those are all available to watch. There's a whole library of them available, and we're going to do the minor arcana later this year, which I'm very excited about. Gonna have to do some prep for that. It's a big journey. And yeah, so it's like a whole library of resources that is always growing and always changing. Yeah. And so it's just there to have like soft spaces for practices and for developing our sense of intuition. And I also have the upper tier as well, where we do Zoom calls every month and we just talk about life and we explore different topics and themes together and share our art and our projects. It's a really, really awesome space. So yeah, there's a lot there.
Very exciting. Well, thank you for taking the time to chat with me. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or dive into that we didn't get a chance to speak about?
Man, I think we did such an amazing job. We covered so much in this little window of time. I'm kind of amazed. And I feel like we had such a fun time talking about trust and exploration. You asked some really great questions. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you. Well, we're going to wrap recording. This is the last episode, so give yourself a round of applause.
Oh,
And
good job for a whole season.
I'm going to give me a round of applause and we'll conclude. Thank you.
Dynamite, I'm blowing up my mind. I wanna be free, I wanna be cool.